So last week we were looking at Mark chapter 8, and we finished up where the Pharisees come to Jesus, and they say to Jesus, show us a sign from heaven. And then the next verse says, and Jesus sighed within himself. Like, come on. I'm healing blind people. I'm making the lame walk. I'm healing the deaf. I'm feeding the 4,000. I'm feeding the 5,000. You're spiritually blind. You can't see the signs from heaven. So, and then we talked about us. Do we see these signs? Of course, we've got some great ones. 1948, the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. 1967, the taking back of Jerusalem. These two things needed to take place for the end-time prophecies to become fulfilled. So those were great signs for us. And we've got more signs, right? We are getting signs from heaven, right? We see the angels working in the world today. So we're going to take a look at Daniel 11, the king of the north. And what we're going to try to do is kind of see the overview of the nations and how they're aligning in God's plan. We're going to have to set the stage a little bit. We're going to have to go through some history. Yeah, I know. I know. Because there is no history in the Bible, right? So if we can open our Bibles to Daniel chapter 11. In the first two verses, it says, also I, this is Gabriel, the angel, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen. And now will I show thee the truth. Talking to Daniel. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So what happened was, this is at the time of Nebuchadnezzar's image. We had the gold, Babylon, now we're on the silver, the Medo-Persian Empire. And Gabriel's telling Daniel there's going to be this king, the 4th king, right? History proves out it's Xerxes. Right? And he's going to come against Greece. Well, history says, according to some accounts, that he came with this massive army to come against Greece, like 5 million men, right? And Greece hears about it, and they say, let's get out of here. So they take off, and then he comes in. There's no one there, so he destroys the city. The Greek people come back to the land. It's all destroyed, and they say, one day we'll get our vengeance. Their vengeance comes in verse 3. And a mighty king shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. This is Alexander the Great. So now we have the fall of the Medo-Persian Empire, and we go right into the Greek Empire, the brass of the image of King Nebuchadnezzar. Also, if we went and looked at Daniel 8, it would be represented by the leopard of the beast, right? And the leopard represents the speed in which Alexander conquered the then known world. Then says in verse 4, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided by the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity. So this is a map here of the kingdom being divided up. It was divided up by his 4 generals, right? It says it doesn't go to his posterity. He had a son, he had a wife and a son, but Cassander, one of his generals, took care of them by killing them, so no one could lay claim to the throne. And so these 4 guys split up this territory. Okay, these 2 guys don't matter. The focus becomes on Seleucus and Ptolemy. History refers to them as the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. And that's the focus, of course, because right in the middle is Israel. And that's where the scripture focuses on. So the rest of Daniel, or from about verse 5 to, 35 or so, there's a history of these battles between the king of the north, because that's the way the scripture describes them. History says it's the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. The scripture referred to them as the king of the north and the king of the south. And they have just a history of battles going back and forth through all those verses. And it's so accurate. Daniel 11 is so accurate throughout history. It's about a 2,500-year period of history throughout the entire chapter. And it's so accurate that all the historians, Bible scholars, are all in agreement that, this is exactly what happened. And everyone's in agreement, and they can't believe the detail in which Daniel 11 has played out through history. And the skeptics say, it's so accurate that it couldn't have been that way. It must have been written after the fact. Of course, denying the divine hand, right? So when we have the king of the south, What that means is that there's a foreign power ruling here in Egypt. Okay, so this is during the Greek Empire, so the Greeks are kind of calling the shots in Egypt. In the north would be a foreign power ruling with from the headquarters in Syria, and then to the east. So when we talk about that, that's what we're talking about. A foreign power ruling in Egypt, and a foreign power ruling from Syria and eastward. And now the names of the kings, there are many kings that came and went through the history, but they're not mentioned because they're not important. They're just referred to as the king of the north and the king of the south. Now, their names aren't important, but the roles that these kings play, that's important in the purpose of God. So why north? Why north of what, south of what? Israel, right? Yeah, because that's where God's has his eye on. So when we fast forward through history, we come to verse 36, and we have a change in history. We come and as mentioned, this king shall do according to his will. And now this is a fast forward through history, and we know this because we can look at a couple of references in Daniel that tell us that this is of the times of the end. If we look at verse 35, but towards the end it says, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Okay, so Gabriel's telling Daniel it's for a later time. And if we go back to chapter 8 and 11 kind of go together. And if we go to chapter 8 and verse 17, at the end of 17 it says, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Verse 19, at the end of it says, for at the time appointed the end shall be. Verse 26, it says, and the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. It's going to be in the future, right? And again, he's given this big expanse of history, right? And in some of the passages, Daniel seems overwhelmed by this information, right? And then in verse 25, at the end of 25, this king spoken of is going to stand against the Prince of Princes, right? This is Christ. But he shall be broken without hand. And that, so we say, oh, well, that's kind of a familiar one. So if we go back to Daniel's interpretation of the dream, back in Daniel chapter 2, in verse 34, it says, thou sawest, speaking about the image, until a stone was cut without hands, which smote the image upon its feet, that were of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then were the iron, the clay, the bronze, silver, and gold broken in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. And then that stone turns into the great mountain, right? We know that stone represents Christ and eventually the kingdom of God. So what we get here in back in Daniel 11. So we know this is a future prophecy, but it's a dual prophecy. So what we have here in verse 36 to 39 is the rise of the Roman Empire, right? So now the Greek's going to get out of the way, and Rome's going to come in, right? The iron of Nebuchadnezzar's image. But yet it talks about all these end times. So on one, the immediate one is going to be the end of the Greek Empire. Rome's going to take its place. And as a second, the dual purpose application, it's going to talk about the end of the kingdom of men. Okay? And we'll try to figure out who these latter-day representatives are. So this represents the rise of Rome under Constantine. In verse 37 it says, neither shall he regard the gods of his father, nor the desire of women. So Constantine came in, right, and he's got it, and he says, you know what, we're not going to be pagan anymore, right? That was the god of their fathers, the Romans, was a pagan god. And he said, instead we're going to be Christian, right? I think there was a battle that took place, and he said, I looked up and I saw the Christian cross in the sky, and the Christian God gave us victory, so now we are going to be a Christian nation. And that's when we have the merging of paganism and Christianity, and the start of polluting Christianity, I guess. So this represents Constantine and the rise. And then Constantine said, you know what? He's in his empire, and he says, you know what? That place Byzantium, which we'd call Turkey today, Byzantium, that's a pretty good place. military advantages, economic advantages. I think I'm going to move my headquarters there. So now we get the two legs of Nebuchadnezzar's image, right? The Roman Empire split. One foot in Rome and the other in what he would call later Constantinople, what we would know today as Turkey. Okay. I know I'm going kind of fast here. I think I've got too much material. So I want to get it all in. Okay, so, and notice that in verse 36 to 39, there is no mention of the king of the north or the king of the south. It's just the king. So why would that be? Well, there's only one king. The Roman Empire controlled both of these territories. So there's no need to designate them as north or south. There's just one king, and that was Rome. Really? It's just Rome. It is the time of the end. So let's close with prayer. I don't have this. Okay, so we'll get back to that once I restart here. No. I'm hoping it's just doing it on its own. Bill! So anyway, so they're there, and then came the Muslims, right? Revelation 9 talks about the loosening of the river Euphrates, right? Refers to the hordes of the locusts, right? And this represents the Muslims, right? They came in hordes of locusts. There was so many of them. And God brought them. The angels loosed that power in the Euphrates, and in comes the Muslims, and they hammer on the eastern leg of the Roman Empire and move them out. I'm really going to need my slides.
Can you describe what pictures we're supposed to be seeing?
It is awesome. It is awesome.
Did you draw them, Butch?
I did draw them, yes. Okay, so anyway, so that becomes the Ottoman Empire. And as soon as this kicks back, we'll take a look at that.
Where did the Muslims originate?
I don't know. Rich?
Just wonder, like they're everywhere now.
Yeah.
Probably go,
So they originally started in Saudi Arabia. There were a tribe, several tribes down there, and then Muhammad brought them together. And then around 623, 625, slowly moved all the tribes into one, and then started conquering that whole area. And then, so Muslims, it's a religion that covers a lot of different ethnicities, right? So, you can, they're in the Far East, they're in the Middle East, they're everywhere, but it did start in Saudi Arabia and come up. Some people, in Revelation 9, it talks about the bottomless pit. And some people have said that that's a reference to Muhammad, but as Butch said, that coming out of the Saudi Arabia and kind of filling up that whole area with a new religion. And it was done through conquest, mostly.
All right. Thanks, Rich.
You could fill in another 5 minutes.
Yeah, could you cover this? Really? 12%?
Man, that's not right.
Killing me.
You're killing me.
Killing me. All right. We're going to have to move on. Good timing. Let's look at Daniel 11 in verse 40. Here we have another change in history. It says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, with horsemen, with many ships. And he shall enter the countries and shall overflow and pass over." So we have another change in history. We're reintroduced to the king of the south and to the king of the north. And we're told that this is at the time of the end. Okay, so we've already seen the end of the Greek Empire. So this is telling us this is that dual application. It's going to be at the time of the end of the kingdom of man. So let's try to identify who the king of the south is and who this him is. Because we have this him, the king of the south is going to push at him. So let's try to identify who that him is. And who that is, any guesses on who that might be?
Logically, it must be the king of the north.
That's what it seems to read that way, right? but it's pushing at him. And the him, I would suggest, and this has been the historical opinion of Christadelphians, is that the him is the king, the latter-day king of verse 36. Okay, so verse 36 is talking about a king. That was the Roman Empire. But then came in the Ottomans. They took their place. So they're now playing the role of the king, the latter-day king. Okay? And so then we'd have to establish who the king of the south is. Right? So the him that's being pushed at, that's the Ottoman Empire. So who's the king of the south that's doing the pushing? Right? And remember, that's got to be a foreign power that is influencing or occupying Egypt. Well, in 1882, Britain moved into Egypt. There was a revolt, and previously Britain and France had purchased or bought a bunch of shares into the Suez Canal. Egypt was in some financial trouble, sold shares. Great Britain and France bought up a bunch. And then there was a bit of a revolt, and the leader in Egypt at the time said, hey, Britain, you know, being one of the world powers, can you come in here and quell this revolt and, you know, protect your interests, financial interests? So they said, yeah, we've got financial interests. We're coming in. So that was in 1882. And then after that, World War I broke out. And during the war, the Ottoman Empire decided to side with the German power. So they immediately become enemies with Great Britain. And Great Britain attacks them and pushes them back, as you can see from that slide. So they push them all the way back to Turkey, what we would call today Turkey. They move them out. Remember, Allenby walks right into Jerusalem. The Turks flee. Right? He doesn't even fire a shot. And so what happened is, after World War I, you know, the other nations say, you know what, Great Britain, why don't you guys, you know, take over Egypt and Palestine, right? And so they take over that territory. They become the latter-day king of the South. Really? Rock bottom. Killer. Okay. So we'll have to do this without, I guess.
If you punch up the program, I'll like to come in.
To the rescue.
This thing just keeps going updating. Turn off your PC. This will take a while. We don't have a while. All right. All right, so we're going to have to adjust on the fly here. Okay, so so that's what we get as a latter-day king of the south. We've got Great Britain. We come into Daniel 41. Daniel 11, verse 41 continues. It says, he shall, okay, no, I'm sorry, back in 40. So it now continues on. So we've got that little, what is that, a colon, semicolon, at the end of,
Halfway through the verse?
yeah, halfway through the verse there. That's the current time in which we stand. From that point onward, everything is future. We're talking about the future here. So we have, we now have, and the king of the north shall come against him. So we've got to identify who the king of the north is. And again, he's coming against him. We've already identified that. That was the Ottoman Empire, which is now just Turkey. That has been reduced to just Turkey. And so we know, historically, we've always thought this was Russian. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into how we figure that out. Historians, other Bible scholars, it's not just a Christadelphian thought, all believe that this points to Russia. And they come against him like a whirlwind with a massive invasion is what this is talking about. So let's, and then in verse 41, it says, and he shall enter, talking about the king of the north, Russia. He shall enter in also to the glorious land. So what would the scriptures call the glorious land? Israel, right? So he's going to come down into Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the chief children of Ammon. Now that would presently be called Jordan. So it's kind of strange that they tell us that, you know, he's going to come flying down, but, you know, he's not going to go into Jordan. And we'll address why we think maybe the reason for that is, if there's a slide. Okay. So let's take a look at Ezekiel 38 for a second. Ezekiel 38, verse 2, it says, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Some other versions refer to it as the prince of Rosh, ancient name for Russia, right? Gog is a title, a leader, like Pharaoh or Caesar. So it's an individual, and he's of the land of Magog. And again, we've determined that that is Russia. So this is brutal without my mouth here.
Do you want to just take 5 minutes to get restarted?
It just says it's updating, and this is going to take a while. So we can go on. So just imagine this map in your mind.
This is why Mark Hampton uses book charts.
Good idea. Foolproof, right? So verse 5, we'll just try to identify a few of these nations. So verse 5, we get, it says Persia, that would be present-day Iran, Cush, Put, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Put, Libya. They come with them. We've got Gomer. Now, Gomer started out in Turkey, and then they migrated something to like France and Germany. And then you've got, with all its hordes, and then you get the house of Togarmah of the north quarters. So that was like Turkey, but in the north quarters. That would be like present-day Armenia, Georgia, those areas. So you see that a lot of these nations are with them. And so if we, what's that?
Say
With Russia, yep. With Russia, which is a little bit strange because we look at what happened with Russia when they entered the Crimea. And the world was, hey, hold on. You can't be invading another country. And they said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put these sanctions on you, and we're going to isolate you from everybody. You're going to be isolated. You're going to get hurt economically. You're not going to be able to do it. No one's going to do anything with you. You'll be isolated. Yet the scriptures say that all these nations are with them. And we look at the things today, and all of a sudden, already just a couple of years later, the nations are going, the sanctions, we should get rid of those sanctions on them. And they're turning to Russia for help, right? They're the ones who are fighting ISIS. You want to fight ISIS? They're claiming they're fighting ISIS. I think they're doing other things. But you want something done? You got to go to Russia. America, they've hightailed it out of the Middle East. They don't want anything to do with it, right? I mean, who has just volunteered to administer over the peace process with the Palestinians and Israel? It's not America anymore. It's Russia. They haven't been isolated, right? And Ezekiel tells us, you're going to be a God unto them. They're going to turn to you. And that's what we're seeing happening. And we see that all these nations are going to be with them. You know, this is speaking about the time of Armageddon. So that's one facet of it. And then Israel is identified in verse 8. It says, after many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into land that is brought back from the sword, gathered out of many peoples against the mountains of Israel, which have always been waste, but now it's brought forth out of the nation, right? That's speaking of course, the regathering of Israel. So they're mentioned there. We come down to verse 13. You got Sheba and Dedan. That's the Saudi Arabian peninsula. And, the Gulf nations like Qatar today. And then we see the merchants of Tarshish. Tarshish is identified historically as Britain. That's one of the points. If you remember the Brexit, and there was a bit of a buzz through the Christadelphian community with the Brexit, this would be one of the verses that they would go to and say, we've been saying for a long time that Britain will not be part of the EU, right? Because, in one instance here with Ezekiel, they're not with them. They've separated themselves. And with the whole EU thing, Britain, one of the reasons why they said we got to leave here is because we don't want to give our power over to the EU. We can't make any more decisions on our own. We can't enter trade agreements. We can't do anything. Everything is determined by the EU Council, whoever they are. They make all the rules and you abide. So in this case here, Britain couldn't, be with Europe in this invasion and oppose them at the same time. So this is one of the verses that we would historically go to say, see, the Brexit. And also with all the young lions with group. So this would be America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, which is actually the same thing as Australia. I try to get that one in on Phil every time I can. And so they don't really, we see that they don't really, there's no conflict there, right? So they oppose, and it's interesting that it's Sheba and Dedan in Saudi Arabia, opposes an invasion of Israel. Now, there was, a united Arab nation, and they had a goal, and that was to remove Israel from being our neighbor. Get them out of our neighborhood. We don't want them here. And so it's interesting that we would see, in that relationship, as you can see from that slide, is developed today beautifully, that they are together. Saudi Arabia and Israel are working together. Things like the Iran nuclear deal, right? They were scratching their heads at America going, what are they doing? They can't have, we're their allies. Why are they working with the enemy? And so Saudi Arabia and Israel said, let's forget them. We got to work together. And they have, with the common enemy being Iran, because we see today that there is that division of Shiite, Sunni religion in the Arab world today. And it's, the hatred for those guys is even stronger than the hatred for Israel at the moment. So it's a bit surprising. And if you read this, 20 years ago, you'd be like, oh, there's no way. Saudi Arabia, they supported the Six-Day War. They're not going to be. They hate the Jews. But here you see that they're opposing this. But all they do is say, hey, why you come? Have you come to take a prey? Have you come to take a spoil? Why are you guys here? Right? And it's the same thing that we kind of see today is, hey, Russia, why are you moving into the Crimea? There's no military. They're not stepping in their way saying, hey, back off. It's just, we condemn this. You can condemn it all you want. I'm taking over the world. You can send me all the letters. You can make all these announcements. And unless you're going to stand up to me militarily, I don't care. Right? It's very, if you know anything about Hitler, when Hitler was, making his big move, it's eerily similar to what Russia is doing today. Now, whether Gog here is Mr. Putin or not, I don't know. But he certainly fits a lot of the characteristics of what we'd be looking for in a leader. But, Hitler said, listen, I know the world does not want another world war, and that's where I'm hedging my bet. So let's go take some land back. And they did, and they got letters. Hey, you can't do that. We signed a treaty. He went, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to continue to move on, knowing they don't want a war. Well, America's already told them, we're not putting soldiers, we're not putting boots on the ground, we don't want a confrontation. Great, that's the information I was looking for. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. So, all they really say is, what have you come for? Because we know who the one who's going to stand up to them, and that's Christ. So let's go back to Daniel. Daniel 11 and verses 42 and 43, it says, He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and of all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So the one thing to notice is, again, we're talking about the king of the north. He shall stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt is not going to escape. So the one thing to notice is that Egypt is referred to as Egypt, not the king of the south. So we would expect at the time of this attack that Egypt would have some independence, right? And so there was the time when Britain was considered the king of the south, but in 1954, Egypt said, why don't you guys go? So they left. And at that point, they had basically independence. You could possibly say that, well, maybe it was America who was playing the role of the king of the south because they heavily supported. They had the whole Anwar Sadat in Israel They had that peace treaty, and America was, involved in that and basically gave Egypt, I think, like $1 billion a year to Mubarak to kind of, we want to influence you. Well, that moved out of the way, and now there's a lot of chaos in Egypt, and they're independent today. So we see that this lines up perfectly with Scripture. We would expect them to be independent, and they are. So then it says that he's going to have the treasures of gold and of all the precious things of Egypt. So what might we say? So Egypt does have gold. I think it was about a year ago. What would bring Russia down into Egypt? And it was about a year ago that they found a massive natural gas resource off the coast of Egypt. So that could be the spoil spoken of in Ezekiel 38, for sure. Another thing would be the Suez Canal itself. It's great military advantage to have that Suez Canal, and commercial, right? So it's a valuable piece of property. That could be enticing to him. The other thing might be, if you remember a few years ago, right after Russia invaded the Ukraine, the Crimea, and all the sanctions were coming on, and all the world was like, you can't do that. France had built these 2 Mistral warships for Russia, and they had just finished them. The Russian soldiers were on board in France, and they were teaching them how to use them and all that type stuff. And then France said, after you guys did this, we're getting a lot of pressure. We can't give you these ships. And Mr. Putin said, well, okay, give me my money back, and the penalty for breaking the contract. And it was like, ooh, really? And so they did. Right? They got a lot of pressure. And these ships sat in France for quite a while. Well, just last week, the second of these 2 ships was delivered to a particular nation. Any guesses on what that nation would be? Egypt. They said, we'll take them. Now, Russia knows how to operate them. And when Russia was kicked out, and they said, okay, you guys, you Navy guys got to go. You can't learn about this ship anymore. Well, there were some things that were missing after they found out after they left. It was like the computers, how to operate everything. You think they took that stuff back to Russia to learn how to do that? Probably. So that would be something, they've got those. We want those. And these are a sea-to-land invading ship. Carry helicopters, great for an invasion. Of course, this is what we know that they're going to do. So these might be, some of the precious things of Egypt. The Ethiopians, the Libyans are with them. So then we go to verse 44 and 45. So while he's down in Egypt, he gets, it says, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go with a great fury to destroy it, and utterly to make away many. He shall plant his tabernacle at the palaces between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So basically, if you're in Egypt and you go east and north, you're going to come into Israel. And he's going to basically set up shop between the 2 seas, probably the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean, probably right in Jerusalem. And if we want to see what happens, if we go to Daniel 12 and verse 1, and it says, and at that time, when he's planted his tabernacle, when he's made, I'm going to set up my shop right here. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince who standeth for the children of thy people. So, is this Michael the archangel? No, I think we think that this is Christ, right? Michael means, anyone know what the name Michael means?
Who is like him?
Yeah, who is like God? Yep. So we would think, well, that's Christ, because this is talking about the time of the end, right? Right after this, it talks about resurrection and all that type of stuff. But also, I read this in a commentary, it was pretty good. The angels in heaven, they don't sit. They stand before God. So it wouldn't be Michael the archangel. But Jesus sits, right, on his Father's right hand. But now he stands up to deliver his people. Okay? And you know what? The rest of this just doesn't make any sense without my. Well, good. I ran out of time anyway. Just about. So how about some comments on any of this? Sorry, this didn't.
Well,
This
you're
didn't work.
talking about here in verse 43 of chapter 11.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the king of the north coming down and taking Egypt, and it mentions Libya and Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you think of where Egypt is in relation to Libya and Ethiopia, it's right smack in between.
Yep.
So, you know,
Yeah.
from a military standpoint, you always want to control your flanks. You know what
That's
I mean?
right.
So
That's right.
I think that's another reason why you can see the king of the north taking Egypt, because
Yeah.
you got Libya over here and you got Ethiopia down there.
Yeah.
And now you own that whole section without some sort of trouble in between.
Yeah. And there's a problem between Ethiopia and Egypt. They're fighting over the Nile. Ethiopia built, what do they call it? The Renaissance Dam. This massive dam. They say it's the pride of Ethiopia. And Egypt said, whoa, 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 you're not going to be controlling we don't want you controlling the Nile. And they said, well, hey.
The Nile goes the other way, right?
Yeah. And they said, we don't want it, no way. Yeah, they say Egypt is the Nile. This is our lifeblood. Without the Nile, we're not going to. So there's a lot of kind of skirmishes going back and forth. So there's a little, already, there's already that rivalry. There's something going on there already. So yeah, and they border. And all that action, all those places right around Israel, right around northern Africa, the Middle East, that's where all the hot spots are, right? A lot of action going, a lot of governments, they're very unstable. Egypt, they've got these great natural resources with this new discovery, but the government's so unstable. People are like, we can't go in there. You guys are, you're too unstable. Libya, the same thing. Putin has deals, so we're naming all these nations. Well, Mr. Putin, Russia, he's coming out with all these contracts, reaching out to them. He reaches out to Libya. In the 70s, Libya reached out to Russia. We've got a common enemy in the United States. Sell us some weapons. Okay, that's good. And then in the 80s, the relationship became stagnant because of international sanctions on Libya. And then came Mr. Putin in 2008 and said, Libya, we're going to reach out to you because you've got great potential in natural resources. And this is what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to scrap all the old debt that you had to the USSR. We're going to just rip that up. We're going to make new contracts. We'll sell you weapons. You'll give us some things, and things will be good. Oh, yeah, and there's one more thing. I want access to your Navy port in Benghazi. Okay? Fair enough. That's their deal. So we see through history, now they're in a relationship. They're with him here in the scriptures. They're with him now, right? There's two things that Russia does well. Military weapons, that's what they sell, and they're good at exploiting natural resources, oil and gas, right? And that's how they make their money. They want war, they promote it, right? It's good for business. So they make these alliances with these countries to try to get in there. They want to stabilize Libya. Libya right now is the two governments fighting for power. One is pro-Russian, the other one isn't. Who's going to win? Well, the scriptures might tell us the pro-Russian one will, right? Because they're with them at the time of the end. And wasn't that a wonderful display? That's disappointing.
I think the slides would have just taken away from the
Yes.
You can give it again in 2 weeks.
All right.
You can send out the slides too.
What's that?
I can send out the slides.
No one wants to see them. All right. Any comments or anything? Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll say this.
Yeah.
So all this stuff is happening right now.
Yes.
There's some, I don't want to say it's controversy is not the right word, but there's some question, we've been saying this stuff's been happening right now for decades, if not centuries. John Thomas back in the 1870s, was looking at certain things and saying, oh, this is definitely the very time of the end.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so right now there's this large push, not just in our community, right, but religious people who study the Bible in general, saying all these signs really point to the time of the end. So how do we tell the difference between whether or not this really is the time of the end or one of these other times? Maybe we're just going through a phase that maybe, 5 years from now, Russia's economy collapses and everything falls apart and, all these ties fall apart. And the key is, as always, the key is Israel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so because the time of the end is established at the time when Israel becomes a nation within that declaration of Israel
Right.
becoming a nation, and Jerusalem becoming their city.
Yeah.
And that's 47 and 67, right? Or 48, 67.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the big key. The key is always Israel.
Yeah.
That's always at the heart of it. You know,
Right.
we can look at, discuss
right.
whether or not Togarmah is this or
Right.
Gomer is that or all that kind of stuff. But in the end, it's all surrounded around Israel.
That's right. Yeah.
And as a community, that's where, the Christadelphians have always sort of separated themselves from everybody else. They've looked at all these other, well, let's watch what United States does, or let's, maybe China's going to get. It's always about Israel.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
And so when you look at these signs of the times and you say, well, I don't know if this is that period or not. Well, there's sort of a, what would you call it? Like a constant.
Yeah.
Like when you have a chemical and you have a K? That's the constant? Well,
Yeah.
Israel's the constant.
Yeah.
And there's a convergence of all the signs.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
a great convergence of these signs.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's an incredible time. And if you're one of those, maybe we got it wrong on Russia, right? And Jim and I have talked. Well, God reveals to His servants. So if He hasn't revealed it to our community, then who is He revealing it to? Is it the Pope? If He hasn't revealed it to us, then who has He revealed it to? And if you ever thought, well, it can't be Russia, we were wrong, and maybe you were. I've talked to some veteran Christadelphians who kind of went, well, I'm just sick of hearing about it. Right? Fair enough, right? But now you see him move in to Syria. Can you still deny that, right? That's where he's supposed to be. And can you still say, no, that should be exciting for us, that he's moved in there, which there was another article that I had a clipping. It says, Obama has reversed 70 years of U.S. presidential policy. For 70 years, United States president's job was to keep Russia out of the Middle East and keep them out of Europe. Keep them back. That was NATO's job, right? NATO was get them back. We don't want another world power. We don't want another Cold War. Get them out of there. And Obama said, we don't want a lot to do with it. We don't need the Middle East as much anymore. And he creates a vacuum. Someone will always come into the vacuum, right? That's what they said with all the terrorist groups, right? There's always you can't get rid of a drug dealer. You get rid of one, another one comes in. There's a vacuum there. And Russia has come right in, waltz right into Syria, have massive influence in the Middle East now. So much so that they're going to, host that peace treaty, right? Try to bring peace to the Middle East. And the United States has withdrawn themselves.
So you ask yourself, why does the United States not need the Middle East anymore? Right?
Yeah.
And understand, America's always about money. Now, we
Yep.
know that, right? It's
Oh,
always
yeah.
about money. That's what
Yeah.
it's about. They don't need the Middle East anymore. And they don't need the Middle East anymore because now you've got things like fracking and all these other things. We don't need the oil
Yeah.
anymore. The biggest exporter of oil now, I believe, is the United States. So we don't
Yeah.
need it anymore. As soon as we don't need it, all the sort of,
Yeah.
well, we're there for humanitarian or we're there for,
That's right.
stability. All that stuff goes out the window.
Yeah.
And so that's why the United States, that's why Obama's, what do we need the Middle East for? We don't need
Yeah.
it. We don't need the oil.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, we're just sliding away and
Yeah.
sliding away.
Yeah.
Now Russia, they're sitting on Russia's border. The
Yeah.
Middle East just sits on the border of Russia. So Russia needs that place to be under his control. That's
Yeah.
what Russia is. Russia is a
Yeah.
control freak.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got a vested interest.
Huh? Yeah, he needs their seaports. He needs
It's a
their,
landlocked country.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, that was part of the reason why he moved into the Ukraine. Part of it was the natural resources. They got all the their pipelines that go through the Ukraine to feed Europe, and then the Ukraine had just announced, hey, I think we've found some natural resources. That's when he moved into action, right? And then he takes Crimea, Navy port, and natural resources. That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.